Okay, hopefully that was the first frame of the video for this. So good morning. Anyway, how was your week, Norman?
It was busy.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, sir?
Well, being a full-time worker and all the other stuff I do, pastor. I'm actually a cybersecurity subject matter expert for a university. It makes sure that I don't have too many down days. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
It's fun. I enjoy doing this. It gets me out of bed literally before my alarm goes off in the mornings. So I'm happy to be here. Did you have anything that went on with you in reference to cybersecurity or training or schooling or a video you saw or anything?
Not really. I mean, no, not really. Just like keep studying all the time, and now I'm dealing with my classes regarding networking. And it's a lot, yeah. So now we're doing like wireless networking and learning about those protocols and encryption tools and stuff like that.
Okay. So you're learning about hashes and those sorts of things. And I sometimes I think about this, and it's sort of like people want to know more about cybersecurity, and I say, well, you have to understand, if you will, the highway upon which cybersecurity typically relies, and that's the internet, and that's running TCP/IP protocol usually, and how does that work? If you don't know how TCP/IP works, or UDP, or any of the other various transport methods, you got to start somewhere. I think, Chris, let me know your thoughts on this, but I would venture to say that as soon as somebody gets their Security Plus, the next thing they should shoot for would be something like a Network Plus, if they haven't already obtained it. Your thoughts, Chris?
If you already have the Network Plus and you have that role fit already, or your university says, hey, take this next, start looking at the vendor certs. For example, Cisco CCNA, routing and switching security, or the Palo Alto or the Juniper certs, just depending on where you work or what your college says to do.
Right.
That would be my guidance and suggestions.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so in the end, it's hard to even imagine cybersecurity without understanding networking.
Oh yeah, I remember when I signed up for my first semester, I was thinking cybersecurity is only about protecting your computer system, and then because I didn't know anything about it. But then later on, I found out actually it's everything about networking. So that's the main thing, like wireless, wired network, the internet. That's actually the main thing, and I'm not surprised why we have to go through all those things like about networking and learning a lot of things regarding networking.
Right. It's sort of like, being a race car driver and not understanding the engine that's under the hood. Sort of like you might be able to do it, but you could do it probably a lot better by saying, I hear a sound, I think it's my lifters, or something like that. It's just part and parcel to a cybersecurity career. Again, I can't imagine cybersecurity without networking. It just doesn't make sense. So it's definitely a good tool to have in your tool belt is a strong knowledge of networking. And that would be things like ports and protocols. That would be things like TCP/IP definition. That would be the 7 OSI model layers. That would be, let me think of some of the other ones. Firewalls, different firewall types, intrusion detection versus intrusion prevention. You know, all of those fit together in a networking context. And so they, you know, they all make for your knowledge level.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's a lot. It's now we are learning about like making a secure connection between client and servers, different types of servers, and using secure protocols for that connection and handshake.
Handshake. Yep.
Yeah. So
authentication overall. Yep. Identity access and management. That's a big part of the Security Plus as well.
Yep. Let me ask you something. I was thinking like maybe you already did this, but maybe next time can we maybe talk about like policies, like security policies, like implementing those policies like in any kind of company or business, like security policies?
We can, definitely. The challenge you run into is that there are policies that arrive as a result of like best practices, and they are somewhat spotty in their implementation. You know, everybody says, oh yeah, I know I got a patch, but I'm busy, or something like that. The policy kind of falls victim to the day-to-day churn that's going on. So yes, there's policies, but then you have to be really energetic about making sure that those policies are applied to whatever you're working on. But sure, yeah, we can talk about them. I would say from a provider standpoint, you have to be the one that lays the groundwork and the expectations for everyone that says these are the policies, they will be followed. You know? So yeah, we could talk about that very easily. Many years ago, I'm serious, many years ago, our organization that Chris and I work for wrote something called the Computer Security Handbook, CSH, and it is an absolute masterpiece of cybersecurity. It has had very few updates in the last, I don't know, 5-6 years, and yet it is still extremely pertinent. So I think it's helpful to think about, when you're talking policies, to think about long-term, you know, and that falls down to best practices. So sure, I would love to be able to spend some time specifically on that.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe like policies regarding using computer workplace, setting up passwords, like maybe like talking about Active Directory and applying those policies for users, for groups, like what is allowed, what is not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
There's, for example, like using Your workstation, going like for surfing on the internet, or changing password every 60 days, and so kind of like implementing those policies to make users, actually workers, to follow those policies. So
sure,
nobody will do, like if you tell someone, hey, you have to change your password every 60 days and your password must be at least like 16 characters, they will not do that. But like if you set up that, like apply that policy in Active Directory, like they have to, like, so next time when they try to log in and get access to some server or remote access, they will be pushed to do that.
They have no choice.
Yeah, something like that. I was thinking. I mean, you guys interested?
Yeah. Very good. I would love to spend some time specifically on that. So be thinking about the questions that you would like to ask, Nerman, and we will try and address them sort of in a Q&A if that works. So good morning, Abrar. Good morning, Harminder. Good morning, Ron. Good to have you all on. Wanted to spend a little bit of time. Does anybody have, by the way, thank you. Sorry about this. Thank you, Nerman. I've got too many names in my head. Does anybody else have anything to share this morning? How was your week? Something that went on? Headlines you saw? A movie you saw? Anybody? Okay. Fair enough. Hey, Harminder, looking good. I see the shirt. Good man. Okay. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about Cyclops Blink first. Can anybody tell me except Chris and me, anybody tell us your understanding of Cyclops Blink, even what you may have heard, which may or may not be true? This is a time where you can share your understanding, and nobody's going to jump on you if you're, a little off the mark. Cyclops Blink, did anybody look it up? Okay, let me ask another one. How about sandworm? Any of you guys remember anything about sandworm? One word, sandworm. Obviously a reference to Dune.
Was it some kind of malware? I remember. The name kind of triggered something. I don't exactly remember it all.
Yep. No, that's good. I appreciate that. You're right, Ron.
Regarding this, yeah, I remember like a few weeks ago I had to update my firewall box and scan my firewall box for this Cyclops Blink. I remember I received email, something like that. If I'm not wrong, I can check.
No, you are absolutely right. And it came from WatchGuard, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That is exactly right, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Anyone else have any thoughts or ideas about Cyclops Blink or sandworm? Okay. I'm going to share with you what I know, which, some of it is based on my impressions, and some of it is based on what I've read in the news. So, take it for what it's worth. I am not giving you this to be the 100% picture. I'm giving you this to indicate what I believe is going on. You guys, have you ever heard, and I'm trying to make sure that we all have the right phrases and everything, have you guys heard of APT groups? APT groups. Anybody?
Yeah, these are like non-state actors in support of terrorism or crime that are involved in cybersecurity threats.
Fully concur with one minor change. They could be state or non-state actors. In other words, there are APT groups out there that are identified as being hired by or employed by or financed by certain governments around the world. There are Israeli APT groups, there are North Korean APT groups, there are Russian APT groups, there are US APT groups. Of course, they call that Cyber Command or whatever, but they're all out there to learn how to do things to their advantage. Let's just think about it that way. So APT is, and this would be in your exam, APT is an advanced persistent threat. That's what APT stands for. And basically it means if it's like malware arrives, somebody discovers it, they come up with something to fix it, they apply the fix, and the malware's not a threat anymore. An APT, however, is a persistent threat. In other words, it's a threat over a long period of time. If I patched my workstation or my servers for something that occurred back in 2016 and it occurs again, my servers should immediately catch it. Okay, so that's the difference between what we think of as malware or viruses or Trojans or worms and APTs. APTs have time, and frequently it takes a long period of time for them to get noticed. They're very difficult to remove or to block, etc. So, and that's basically what happened with Cyclops Blink. Sandworm is what occurred a number of years ago, and it's a Russian-based, just so you know. This is Russian-based, which means Russia has been implicated as financing this sandworm. All right? So first of all, Russia. So Russia's big in the news right now because they're actually, you know, doing their thing against an adjoining country. And it's not just bombs and missiles and tanks and guns. They are actually employing cyber attack scenarios as well. So the APT groups that we have typically associated with Russia are very active. Cyclops Blink is based on the sandworm that occurred back in, I think it was 2016 or 2017. Sandworm got into a number of commercial internet routers, including TP-Link, etc. I have a TP-Link router here. But Sandworm was in like 2016, and there was one source router out there that was actually infecting routers worldwide. And there was one place that it originated. And the Justice Department found it, and it was in the United States, as far as I remember. It was in the United States, and so they actually went and disconnected it. You know, like search warrant, go in, grab this thing, pull the plug, and we are now holding that source router. At least that's the way I understand it. That's how Sandworm, or the main Sandworm, ended. Well, now Cyclops Blink was that APT group's attempt to get Sandworm going again. So, you know, they re-engineered it a little bit, and it's no longer a central source, etc., etc. So, fast forward to a couple months ago, they had discovered this Cyclops Blink out in the wild. It was actually occurring. Internet routers were becoming infected, and they were becoming part of what we know of in your Security Plus manual as a botnet. In other words, they were controlled by an external entity that had no right to be there. They may have continued operating. That's the thing you got to remember. Sometimes these things will sit for long periods of time. I read an article very quickly, but there have actually been APT groups that have sat dormant inside infrastructure components for like 7 months and didn't do anything. But they're there. They have their foothold. Foothold, you need to know that word too. They have their foothold, and they just wait for the opportune time. Okay? So you should always spend time studying about what's called the life cycle of malware. Okay, life cycle. Because it's a series of stages, and it can happen over and over and over again. It can come from all sorts of different directions, and it can take an extended period of time. It's not just, I've been hit, I fixed myself, now I'm better. If only it were that simple, but it's not. So Cyclops Blink was an effort to bring Sandworm back so that this Russian-backed APT group could start, reassembling their botnet. It would primarily affected your firewall, Nerman. WatchGuard?
Yes. Yeah. WatchGuard.
Okay. It primarily affected WatchGuard and secondarily ASUS, ASUS equipment. So a number of advisories were sent out by WatchGuard and ASUS, I'm sure, that said, patch immediately. Here's how to do it. And here's how to remove that threat. Well, what occurred recently to address Cyclops Blink was that the Justice Department, the FBI, had also been able to map and track and define what systems were being affected. Just like the botnet owners could say, where are my bots? The FBI could do the same thing. They knew what the bytes looked like. They knew where they traveled to, where they were coming from, etc. And so the FBI was watching just like the APT group was watching. And here's why we need to be considerate about this. What occurred is the Justice Department went to a federal judge and said, these people that own these WatchGuard firewalls and ASUS firewalls aren't patching fast enough. In other words, a number of folks have patched, but not all of them. So the botnet is still active in those who haven't patched. And so the Justice Department obtained a ruling from a federal judge, and they went to like 13 different IP addresses out on the internet, verified to be U.S., okay? Not Guatemala or Costa Rica or anything like that, but proven to be within the United States boundary. That's FBI, okay? They went to these various IPs and broke into these routers and obtained all the information they could within them and then patched them internally. The Justice Department broke into unpatched systems that weren't theirs. Okay? So what is the implication to you as a provider? Anybody want to share? What are your thoughts about that?
I'm kind of scared that the Justice Department can do anything they want.
Think about it. If
I think they didn't have choice. I mean, they had to do it because otherwise it will be spread eventually. So
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I am not disagreeing with you. I'm bringing up the thought about this, okay? The thought is, and Ron stated it very accurately, if the federal government thinks that it's in the best interests of society, they can do stuff that you don't know about in your systems. You know, that's pretty scary, because what happens is, number one, you could have avoided this whole Cyclops Blink thing if you had patched. Okay? First of all, WatchGuard said, here's the advisory, go patch. And some people didn't. All right? So first of all, we go back to, what do I always say? First and foremost, patch everything all the time. Make sure your patches are up to date. Your firmware, your virus checks, your definition files, etc. Do it all the time, and make sure that everyone around you knows that if they're not part of the solution, they're part of the problem. Okay? So, and I did this on one of our previous sessions. I said, you have to be, and be comfortable with this, you have to be that annoying voice who stands up in the middle of the party or the family reunion and says, anybody got iPhones? Have you patched it? You know, why? Because you care about what happens to their iPhones. They don't until they break. Wait, I can't get my Facebook. Uh-oh. Yeah, well, you should have patched 4 weeks ago when they told you to, you know? So you sort of have to help encourage the culture of being defensive on things like network infrastructure and personal devices. You have to be the annoying voice. All right, so get comfortable with it. You're doing it because you want people to be safe. If we make sure that, you know, the APT groups aren't running hither and thither around our networks, maybe they will go find themselves another occupation. It just doesn't become something that they want to be, you know, to even be involved in. You make the rewards so small and the penalties so great that they say, you know what, I think I'll just be a carpenter or something else. Discourage them by being vigilant. All right, so Cyclops Blink was the federal government obtaining a judge's permission to go patch systems that weren't theirs in America simply because the risk was so high. And it needed to be done. WatchGuard had already sent out their advisory, and certain people just either didn't get the message or didn't think it was important enough with their WatchGuard appliances. So the federal government basically said, this is really important. If you can't do it, we'll do it for you. That's a scary place to be. Okay. Hey, Chris, can you take over for a minute? I gotta do something. I'll be right back.
Anything else that anybody wants to share? Any further comments before Scotty comes back? Silence is deafening. My understanding of this Cyclops Blink, and I was a little bit out of the loop this week because my work's been hectic. The Russians are very interesting folks, to say the least. I'm not sure if we are fighting the right battles. If you guys get what I'm saying, I'm not sure what's going on, in all honesty. But it makes me agree to what CISA says about shields up from a provider standpoint. And being always on guard and making sure you're doing if you can't do it all, at least do the minimal of defending yourselves. That would be my sense on the topic.
Thanks, Chris. I think it's important for us to remember that the intruders will always take the path of least resistance. They will always find the weakest link in the chain. And you may have patched 99%, but you forgot that old, thing running your well, remember the one we got from Douglas, your fish tank thermometer, fish tank thermostat or whatever it was in that casino.
Another thought that I'm having, and these are the first two controls, if you don't do anything at all, and you don't know the NIST stuff, you don't know the STIGs, the technical implication guides, you have no clue what those are, I'll share a website later today called the CIS controls. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but one of the things I will suggest to people, even with home networks, is to know what's on your system and know what's installed on the system. Have that inventory. And that would be my first guiding advice.
Yeah. Just so you know, you can learn a lot just by going to your own internet router. And by the way, it has default login and password. You can only get to it locally, but you can get to it in most cases. That's literally why I got rid of my Cox internet router and bought myself a TP-Link internet router. I wanted to be able to manage my local network. It was, $70, $80 or something, and the Cox one is still brand new in the box. Okay, that allows me the opportunity to practice and study and do things like Chris was saying, learn about what connects to my network and what tries to connect to my network. I got wireless, and there's a street right next to me, maybe somebody's, you guys have heard of, probably heard of war driving, but maybe somebody's war driving my neighborhood, So anyway, good stuff. Thank you, Chris. And, first of all, see, I have kitty cats, and they sort of did a number on me earlier, a couple days ago. So I got to keep an eye out for them. So SEIs. Any of you guys understand what SEIs are? And this is a brand new acronym. I've never mentioned it before because I've never seen it before this week. But do you know what SEIs are going to take the place of? Somebody came up with a new acronym. Thoughts? Systemically important entities. Sounds real big, doesn't it? SEI or SIEs. Sorry. Oh, yeah, it's SIE. SIE. I got it backwards. SIE. An SIE is going to be the new way of describing critical infrastructures. And here's why. In fact, let me go change that. I had it backwards. SIEs, there are groups right now that are trying to define what constitutes a systemically important entity. Back in the day, they used to have what they called critical infrastructures. In fact, I was on the President's Commission for Critical Infrastructure Protection in the U.S. And at that time, in the late 90s, they had identified like 7 different critical infrastructures, including roads and rail, communications, water, emergency services, banking, those sorts of things. And the internet was one of those. But the problem we have now is that so many things are interconnected that they sort of rely on each other. And when you say critical infrastructure, you can no longer say transportation, because there's now digital transportation. And you can no longer say banking because there's now internet banking. And, you know, these things are getting real muddy. So it's the definitions that worked 25 years ago don't cover everything now. Do you guys remember, I'm going to say, the pipeline issue that occurred and stopped petroleum deliveries in the Northeast for a couple days? Do you remember what systems were affected? Or let's say, how about NotPetya back in 2017? What systems were affected? And this goes to what makes a critical infrastructure and what makes an SIE. I've got to get the acronym right. An SIE. The systems that were affected, the networks that were affected, were not those that deliver the critical infrastructure services. They were the office systems for the companies or groups or whatever that controlled the critical infrastructures. So they used to define a critical infrastructure as being banking. Okay, if it's a banking computer and it's, you know, whatever, but this thing connects to this, so this becomes associated, and it is possible because it is, here we go, it's part of the system. It's then systemically important. So how do you define that? Anything that connects to a banking system could be an SIE? Think about it. Do you connect to a banking system? Bet you do. So does your computer become part of this big thing that they're defining as an SIE? That's the thing we have to think about. I'll give an example. Let's say, and I'm using a real wild example here, but let's say your CEO has just been out for, you know, a few days and comes back in with his brand new fangled Wi-Fi enabled, Bluetooth enabled pacemaker. He can get information on his, you know, how's my pacemaker doing? Because it talks to his phone. But it also talks to anything else that can break into Bluetooth, for example. So now your CEO's pacemaker could have to be something that you take into account when you're designing your infrastructure. Think about it. And that's why there is such discussion going on for these SIEs. Because remember Cyclops Blink. If it becomes something that's really important to society, the federal government can go do it for you. They can break into your system without you knowing. They can do things in your system without you knowing. Because our government is based on what's called legislation and precedent. In other words, how the laws are applied. And that's where it takes a judge to determine whether this thing was applied in accordance with the laws or occurred in violation of the laws, etc. That's why there's so many judges. They're defining the law based on people who use it. So, you know, here we have the challenge. As system providers, how far do we want to help out with Cyclops Blink? How far do we want to define SIEs? And here's just speaking generally, if you don't get involved in these things, someone will get involved for you, because these definitions have to occur. These legal precedents have to take place so the judge can rule whether or not it was legal and figure out whether or not it should stay, those sorts of things. So be thinking about this, because imagine, I'm going to use another wild example here. The federal government gives you, let's say, guarantees for your student loan. By the way, things like this are already occurring in states like California. I'll give you one example. I'm going to back away from the student loan discussion. But California has said that any company over a certain size that contains a board of directors must have certain people of certain genders and or certain ethnic groups as part of their board of directors. It has nothing to do with business. It has everything to do with someone defining what they consider to be fair. And it is imposed on California business owners. Did they decide this? Well, yeah, sort of, because they elected the people who made these laws that are now being applied to them. So if you think that your vote doesn't count, you're wrong. Your vote truly does count. You are only one of everybody, but if you don't exercise your right to vote, somebody's going to vote for you, and things will occur. So I'm trying to remind you, all of this works together, and the internet is causing us to realize that I have something to say, and my Wi-Fi enabled or internet connected refrigerator may be part of the problem or the solution. You know? It's no longer just, me in my house. I go in the house and I close the door and I watch my TV and I have my local internet. It doesn't work that way anymore. We are all interconnected. And therefore, things may occur that the government says are too important to wait on. Therefore, they must act immediately on could be your business, could be your organization. So, Nerman, you asked about policies. Policies are driven by legislation. That's why there's the National Institutes of Science and Technology. That's why there's the FBI. That's why there's the Department of Homeland Security. They all help to drive the laws that everybody needs to apply to, because they don't know how to safely enact things like a WatchGuard firewall. Or WatchGuard has firewalls and they have some sort of error in them that WatchGuard is being told, you must get this, fixed. It's business, but it's also everything is interconnected. So the government, the business, the individuals, the networks, the traffic, they're all blurry. Chris, you were going to say something.
I was, until you said everything's all blurry, and I said, yep, that's right, everything's all blurry. I'll tell you what was on my mind. Our government is interesting when they step into the line and say, hey, I'm smarter than you, we're going to do this for you. I am wondering how the Jeff Bezos, the Tesla guy, I can't think of his name now. Thank you, Marcy. Elon Musk.
Thanks, Marcy.
Those guys either A, know what's on their network, or B, they have enough money to hire experts who know what's on their network.
Mm-hmm.
How do they feel about the government stepping in and saying, you got something on your network that we don't like, we're going to take it away? There's got to be some legal governance. And this is when you said the blurry, and I go, oh yeah, that answers all my questions now because you said the whole thing is blurry.
Yeah. And if you say, you know, what is my business and what is not my business, it's really hard to tell. But I can guarantee you that if you are not involved in actively working on things like making sure you're, well, I got my phone and my iPad here, and the PC that I'm running this stuff on are all patched.
At the same time, Scotty, if I'm smart enough to set up a firewall and say, hey, here's the dividing line between the wild, wild west and then me, I would have some question about the government coming in beyond my firewall and say, you got something in your network that's not being happy here. Mm-hmm. I would like to at least have maybe a letter or a knock on the door or something that says, hey, Chris, do you know about this? Mm-hmm. Rather than you going in and saying, boom, we're going to fix it because you don't know better.
Right. I'm sure that the federal government, when they found these IP addresses out there for these non-patched systems, had a general idea where these systems were. I would say generally, because they get down to who owns what subnets. And IP addresses are allocated to, I don't know if everybody knows this, but IP addresses are allocated to certain government or educational or commercial entities. You own those IP addresses. And if you, if let's say I'm here at my house and I've got a connection to Cox, Cox either owns those IP addresses or borrows them, rents them from somebody upstream. Remember, TCP/IP is based on that, and I'm talking IP4, it's based on octets that define, generally speaking, all the way down to specifically speaking, all right? And there are certain IP addresses, let's say an IP address that starts in 97, that could be allocated to an entire country. Let's say the Democratic Republic of the Congo could have any IP address that begins with 97. They would control everything south of that, everything downstream. So, the higher you go, the larger groups they are, but you cannot guess at your IP address. You can't just say, I want an IP that matches my birth date or something like that. You can't do it. Because TCP/IP is transmission control protocol, IP is internet protocol, and it uses address resolution, ARP, which is defined by the switches and routers. You could call yourself Microsoft.com, but no packets are going to come to you because packets defined to Microsoft.com go over there. You can call yourself Microsoft.com, but no packets will go to you. And any packets that try and go out from you as Microsoft.com are likely to get black-holed. Okay, so the important thing to remember is there is some governance and there is some structure in this. When the Justice Department had identified IP addresses, they knew basically where they were. So, like Chris was saying, they should have done some notification. But they were too busy going over to the judge getting a approval to go in and modify these systems. Maybe they said they will notify afterwards. You know,
probably
that's what you gotta be. Go ahead.
Similar to a no-knock warrant. Like if I'm not knocking on the door, because I know that if I come in and knock on the door, I'm going to tip you off.
Yep.
So you probably want to not tip them off, and then take care of the bureaucratic stuff later. Pardon my language.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I don't know if anybody has watched the news in recent years, but there have been some real bad outcomes from no-knock warrants that were not correct. People have died from no-knock warrants that were issued believing that something was occurring, but it wasn't. For example,
and I'm pretty sure DOJ did our homework there and said, yeah, we knew.
Yeah. Well,
and there are probably some other entities involved as well.
Yeah, the IP address. Yeah, you're right there. The IP addresses again are pretty definite. It's sort of like a street name, a street address. 123 Main Street. Never use that address, by the way. But 123 Main Street literally points to a house that you can see from Google Maps. Same thing with the internet. Those IP ranges go certain places. That's how. Remember. You may or may not have heard about this, and I'm sort of getting off track a little bit. Has anybody heard of geo-blocking? Geo-blocking.
I have.
I can guarantee you, in fact, this occurred with us a number of years ago. The secretary of our department could not get onto a Washington, D.C. website to make a squash appointment. And he liked to play squash. And so he said, this is an IT problem. And they went all the way down to the IT department and said, fix this. And they started investigating, and they said, well, what's the IP address of this server? And they looked at it, and they said, ooh, that doesn't look like a US IP. And they started to go back through it and found out this server was in Russia. Of the Washington, D.C. Squash Club. The server was in Russia. And Russia had been geo-blocked at that point. So it was like, sir, could you maybe pick up the phone and make an appointment? We don't want to undo this geo-block, which has been recommended by, who knows, FBI or Homeland Security or whatever, just because you want to get your squash appointment through their website. Those bytes were going to Russia. So anyway, that's just something to think about. You think about a server, Amazon.com. Where is that? Cisco.com, Microsoft.com, SC Johnson and Company.com. Where are they? Sometimes that makes a difference. They could be in a geographic area that somebody says, this is a high enough threat. Well, let me think about this. You could have gotten a server out on the internet at a really cheap price because it's in Benin. That all of a sudden something occurs in Benin and they say, oh, there's this turmoil going on, lots of malicious traffic is coming from Benin. Let's geo-block Benin. And your bakery website goes down. We're all interconnected. It reminds us that we have to be vigilant in what we're doing, and we also need to be active in it. You can't just rely on other people to tell you everything's cool. there was a claim, and that's why I said, sorry, Nerman. There was a claim that WatchGuard knew about this long before they notified their customers. Long before they notified their customers. So, you know, that's why we have to be smart. That's why we have to know who we're talking to and what that implies. Otherwise, your business could go down because somebody else is doing nasty stuff and you just happen to be on the same server, for example. So anyway, fun stuff. SIEs are going to be extremely touchy because who defines an SIE? It's defined by impact. What if this breaks? And your business could be involved, your corporation, your organization, your club, your homeowners association, your bank, they could all be involved. So it's important for us to know about this stuff. Any questions? Any questions, guys?
Thank you, Scotty. It's blurry.
Yeah,
did answer all my questions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sorry to say, but you know, we get into the realm where somebody says, "Hey, what's the answer to this?" And the answer sort of becomes, "Well, it all depends." And that's why you got to be smart. That's why you got to learn about this stuff. I love learning this stuff. You know, some people may say, "Oh, it's really boring." It's not. It's helping me to protect my 401k. The people that I mentor, I want you to be a white hat because I don't want to have somebody out there messing with my retirement funds, for example. Oh, gee, sorry, I didn't know. No, let's get smart. Let's be a force for good. You know? Anyway, good stuff. If you guys have suggestions for stuff that we can do each week, please drop it on the Facebook page or in the email. Let us know, and we'll be happy to investigate. This came as the result of a couple articles that I saw this week about Cyclops Blink and SIEs. It's not SEIs, SIEs. Systemically important entities. That will be a redefinition of critical infrastructures. So just be prepared for that one. It's going to occur. Okay, that's all I have, guys. Right on time. We're finishing up. Any last minute questions or comments before we go? Super. Okay. Have a great weekend and a great week.
See you guys next week.
And we'll talk to you next time. Thank you.